those who are away from us today, traveling, may they be safe, come back to us quickly. We thank you so much for your love and your blessings which you showed to us through your Son, Jesus. And it's in His name we pray. Amen. All right, Daniel 6. In Daniel 17, 5:17, I should say, Daniel really rebuffs the king and the offer of the gifts that the king is going to give to the one who can give the interpretation of the dream. And so Daniel rebuffs that, and yet as he goes on through the events and he talks about the great high God, our most high God, granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar your father. Now chronologically, he was not father, but he was probably in that, the way the Bible uses the term, oftentimes talking about a great-grandfather or something, so it was in that lineage that he now refers to him as your father. And so then, 19, once again, he's talking about Nebuchadnezzar and the things that Nebuchadnezzar did. And verse 19 is simply the point that Nebuchadnezzar did the things that he wanted. He bestowed things on peoples. He killed whoever he wished, spared whomever he wished, lifted up and elevated whomever he wished. He humbled whoever he wished. So as we ended off last week, I stated to you that I think Nebuchadnezzar is one of those kings of history that probably is underrated in the things that he was able to do, and the fact that he was not only a key figure in bringing about the plan of God, the will of God, but he was also one who simply was a great king. And I think that's indicated to us, and we'll just kind of remind ourselves of this. You know, and Ian gets up here, he recaps everything for you and everything. So when we look at you open up, Nebuchadnezzar is what? According to that great image, head of gold. He's the head of gold. And then you're going to have Darius, that's going to be mentioned in the 6th chapter. He's going to be a part of that Medo-Persian empire that's coming into play. Well, he's going to be identified in that time period by silver, gold and silver, and then we're going to have bronze, and then we're going to go down. And so Nebuchadnezzar is one of those great world leaders. Now, something that I've shared with you oftentimes, though, is a person can be, and Nebuchadnezzar, because Nebuchadnezzar did not humble himself, what happened to him? Okay, he was literally put out to pasture. I mean, he went nuts and was out there, and he was eating grass like a cow. His hair grew long, his fingernails grew so long that it was like eagle's claws. I mean, he went nutso. But now then, after a complete period of time, then God healed him of that. God caused that disease to hit Nebuchadnezzar, and so then he humbled him, and so then Nebuchadnezzar was once again put back to his position. But then again, as all of this unfolded and Nebuchadnezzar was being used, Nebuchadnezzar was an unwitting participant in the plan of God. And by unwitting, what do I mean by that? Yeah, he was an unknowing participant in the plan of God. God was using Nebuchadnezzar to bring about the ultimate establishment of his kingdom. And so Nebuchadnezzar was a part of it, of the plan. And so, but at the same time, the Bible is full of people and nations that God used to carry out his plan. And always, when we talk about this, I just need to direct you to the book of Isaiah and just read the opening chapters of the book of Isaiah. And you're going to read where he raised up this kingdom, and they punished this people, and then this kingdom that he just raised up, they go for a while, and then God raises up another kingdom, and they usurp and overtake this kingdom. So it's kingdoms that are just being used, and this is history being recorded, and so bringing us to the event, of course, that took place on the cross with the crucifixion of Jesus, and all of this is preparatory, bringing us to that point. But now verse 20, but when his heart was lifted up and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was deposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken away from him. Now once again, this depiction for us is given. He was also driven away from mankind, and his heart was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling place was with the wild donkeys. He was given grass to eat like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he recognized that the Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he set over it whomever he wishes. Yet you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. So now, Nebuchadnezzar experiences the things that he did, and the point that is being made in this 5th chapter as we get to Belshazzar is the fact, Belshazzar, you know all of this, and yet you're not doing any better. You're not behaving any better than your father did, Nebuchadnezzar, and you knew all of this. But you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines have been drinking wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see, they do not hear, they do not understand, but the God in whose hand are your life breath and all your ways, you have not glorified. So once again, go back to the point, they're having this great party, and now Belshazzar, his father, Nebuchadnezzar, had seen to it and had commanded that they seize and take the elements, the items out of the temple in Jerusalem, and then they are to bring that, and they set that up in the temple of his God there in Babylon. So we have this temple that he has to his God, whether that be Baal or whoever he might have been worshiping. And so then his son Belshazzar now, and we're talking about son, grandson, whatever he was, now he went and took those items out of that temple of his father, respect for God, Jehovah God, as he's not going to abuse these items in the way that Belshazzar did. So the hand was sent from him, and this inscription was written out, verse 24. So these things have unfolded, these things have happened, and now we see this hand. And, folks, this would be absolutely amazing if we had something like this happen today, where you had this hand and it came up and all of a sudden it just started writing up there on the wall. And you see the hand and it's writing. And apparently that's all there was. And just a hand. No body, just a hand. And it's just writing up there on the wall. And what? Many tekel upharsin. Now, what we need to be thankful for is the next few verses because it tells us exactly what these words meant. Yes, Ben? Oh, no. Yeah, I think that's probably true. And, we're looking at several generations from Nebuchadnezzar. We're looking at several. And this is something I just keep at the front of this book because I can't keep these people straight in my mind. But Nebuchadnezzar, we're looking at, as we've noted before, sometime 6 when he comes into prominence, when Daniel and them are carried away into captivity, and so this is 606 BC. So Nebuchadnezzar is reigning, and then you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 successive kings, and we've gone over their names just very briefly. And then in 553, then you're going to get to Belshazzar. Now, when all of this ends and we open up chapter 6, then who is mentioned? That's going to be Darius. Well, Darius is all the way down to 522. So we're covering a lot of time here, and we're, by the inspiration of the Bible, what's recorded, we're just omitting a lot of people and the events that unfolded. Now, not that history doesn't record it for us, because you can go and historically it's been preserved, and so you can read about these individual kings, and some of them would reign for a few years, some of them would be a few months, and as we're going to even see here at the end of Daniel chapter 5, when once this handwriting comes up on the wall, and then Daniel gives the interpretation. Well, what happens to Belshazzar? Apparently he's killed that night. So, one of the things that was not an expectancy for a long life was to be a king in one of these places, because people would then want what? That position. And so when we look at this, probably, as Ben alluded to, there probably wasn't that interaction of, like we observe it in our families. You have fathers and children, and then you raise your children, and then they give you grandchildren, and so then you have that interaction, and then, great-grandchildren, if you're fortunate enough to live that long and to have that relationship. Well, so that's probably not the dynamic we're looking at here, because you would have people that were appointed to that task. You oversee these children, you do this, and you do that. And so that's a good point, that even though Belshazzar knew all of this, well, this knowledge came to him by historical accounts, because we're looking at years and years between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. Dale? Right.
But what we're looking at right here is the results of God punishing his people, sending them into captivity for disobedience.
Right.
That's exactly what we're looking at. So, but there seemed like always a representative of God somewhere on this earth.
Sure.
Daniel was one of them.
Right. Right.
He was granted not to say that. So then, we have several, like you said, several kings. But they're just gone. That's all that matters. But how does it influence us in our life today?
Right.
How does this influence us? Well, if we're not obeying God, if we're not worshiping Him in the way that He commanded us to do, what's going to happen to us? The same thing, but it won't be in the representative of God in hell.
Well, and this is something that, what does Proverbs 14 teach us? Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a great fall. Proverbs 14:34. Yeah, this is what we're looking at, because when you look about pride going before destruction and a haughty spirit before a great fall, well, it's still true. One of my late teachers and stuff, he says, because we don't use that the way the Bible uses it, but at the same time we need to be careful. And so he struck that out of his vocabulary, because he says, we'll say, I'm proud of you. Well, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong or sinful about using that word, but for him, he wouldn't. And he said, I'll wait on you. No. Yeah. Right. So now he says here in verse 24, so the hand was sent out from him, getting back to this handwriting on the wall, and this inscription was written out. Now this is the inscription that was written out, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. And this is the interpretation of the message, the word Mene. God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. Then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple, put a necklace of gold around his neck, and issued a proclamation concerning him, that he now had authority as the third ruler in the kingdom. So elevation, as Daniel had heard earlier, as we mentioned in this chapter, he rebuffed that. He said, I don't want any of that. I don't need any of that. But Belshazzar does it anyway. So Daniel is the third ruler in the kingdom. And so he is rewarded, and Belshazzar did that. Did Nebuchadnezzar do that with Daniel? Yes. When he gave the dream, the interpretation of the dreams and stuff to Nebuchadnezzar, then he was rewarded. Belshazzar has this dream. He sees this, and writing on the wall. And Daniel interprets it, and he gives him the interpretation, and he tells him the dream. And so Belshazzar is going to reward Daniel for his interpretation, which Daniel always gives credit to whom? How did Daniel do this? How was Daniel able to see the dreams, interpret the dreams? How was he able to do that? God gave him that power. It's not anything inherent within Daniel himself, except for what had Daniel displayed from the very beginning? Who was he going to serve? God. He's going to serve God. He wouldn't eat the king's food. He wouldn't drink the king's drink. He would not bow. His friends wouldn't bow in Daniel chapter 3. And where does that put them? Fiery furnace, which is stoked up, to 10 times hotter than what it normally was. And so then that's what Nebuchadnezzar did. And so then we come to, now here we see this interpretation and this practical power that God had blessed Daniel with, and he's going to interpret this dream, and he's going to give the interpretation. And the interpretation is not a good one for Belshazzar. because he says now that your kingdom will be divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. Now, brethren, we really need to think about this, because when Daniel, in Daniel chapter 2, interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he says, you're the head of gold, Babylon. And then he says another kingdom's coming, and that's going to be the Medes and the Persians. And they're going to be identified with this silver, arms and chest and everything, as Daniel's looking at the image. And then we're going to have waist and thighs of bronze, and that's going to be the Grecian Empire as it comes into play. And then we're going to have legs, and we're going to have feet, and they're going to be mixed with iron and clay. And so that's going to be the Roman Empire. Now, brethren, that's just how the history of the world records them. And here we see where now your kingdom's given over to the Medes and the Persians. And so this is going to take place. And then just jump down to verse 30 very quickly. That same night, what happened to Belshazzar? He's killed. So when we look at this, this is just the events of the world that are happening, and things are going just as Daniel saw them in the second chapter, and they're just progressing. And so all of this does is it just puts a further spotlight on Daniel 4:25. God rules in the kingdoms of men. He still does. He still does. And brethren, we're living this aspect. Before the world ever began, every world ruler that has ever sat, who saw them? Who saw them? God did. And so then these things are all just working out according to his schedule and his plan as he wants them to be carried out. Because in the fullness of time, Galatians 4:4, what did God do? Sent forth his Son. The fullness of time. We're going to note here when we get into chapter 6 that the kingdoms, the world kingdoms, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and the Romans, they all contributed something to this fullness of time. Okay? All right, Dale. Right. Right. That's it. And we're heading in that direction and moving toward the time of the Romans. So, that night, Belshazzar the Chaldean was slain. Now notice, so Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. Now, this is Darius. Now, this is an interesting thing. Belshazzar, now they're having this party. They're having this great event, celebrating whatever the case may be. Now, brethren, y'all remember what I told you about the structure of the city of Babylon? If you were to stretch the walls out lengthwise, you'd have 17 miles of city wall. And they were like 90 feet tall, the walls. How thick were they? Like 22 feet thick. So, from this pew to the end of, start of this pew to the end of that one. That's how thick their walls were. And then on top of the walls, they had guard towers, another 100 feet. Now, Darius the Mede and the Medo-Persians, they are attacking Babylon. And history records for us that the night that they overthrow the city, that's the night that Belshazzar what? Died. And so they're inside the city, and in the minds of the Babylonians, no one can get to us in this city. Because they had not only the city walls and the archers and all of that, but they had moats inside the city, waterways and stuff that they would have that would be hindering of people. And so Belshazzar's in there, and the enemy's outside the gates, literally. And he's inside doing what? He's partying. Yeah, I mean, they can't get to us. They can't harm us in any way. And yet they do. And then here comes this statement. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at the age of 62. Now, what's interesting about that word received? Wouldn't we expect it to be what? Conquered. But he received the kingdom. Who gave it to him? It's got to be an implied understood from that word received, that somebody gave it to him. Well, we know historically that the Medes, they went in and they took it from the Babylonians. But the text tells us he what? He received it. He received it. So, now Darius the Mede is going to get the kingdom. Now we got a few moments, so let's go to Daniel chapter 6. Because, folks, this is the simplest part that we'll read in the book of Daniel. These 6 chapters are the simplest part. Chapter 7, we're going to start getting into this part of the book that is very technical. I'll just leave it at that. We're going to get into 70 weeks in chapter 9, and we're going to get into this. So we are, in these 6 chapters, we're looking at the simplest part of the book of Daniel. All right, Ben?
How does your verse 23 read?
23 read? 5:23? Mine says, but you have exalted yourself against the Lord.
Okay, you started out by saying that Nebuchadnezzar was an unwilling participant,
Right.
or was unaware of how God was using him. Well, it looks to me like in this verse, Belshazzar willingly, knowing what he done, the vessels out of the temple were, took part in it.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
So you see the difference in the 2 kings.
yeah.
Used unwillingly or unknowingly. This, he purposely went and had them get the gold and silver to drink out.
Yeah, and I think he understood the significance of that. And apparently, if he had opportunity to go through the temple where, Nebuchadnezzar's God was, the temple that Nebuchadnezzar had built to his God, and here these things are in there, and they came from the temple in Jerusalem. And so now, what's taking place, the background of this, because they're doing something. He has 1,000 of his people gathered up, and they're having this great feast. They're having this great time of celebration. They're drinking, and they're having this great time. And then the text indicates that as these things were unfolding, then Belshazzar says, go get those items. And they do. Yeah, and so there seems to be a noted difference between Nebuchadnezzar and his respect for God, as he had these in his temple that he had for his God. And so then Belshazzar is going to go and seize them, and they're going to just turn them into things that would just be common. It's just like, folks, we do this, and I'm not saying in a religious sense, but in a practical sense. I can remember that there were times when my grandmother would pull out the good plates. Many of y'all experienced that? These things were reserved and were kept for what? Special occasions. And then the other time we're drinking out of Dixie cups, and we're, paper plates and everything. We're eating off those. And I totally understand it because, grandmother was willing to put her good dishes out for special occasions. And, and I can remember occasions growing up, and what do you think my mother was saying? Take care of Grandma's what? Good dishes. And if you broke one, yeah, my God, yeah, that's a pretty good expression. You're going to get your hide tanned. Because you broke the good dishes. Well, in a significant difference between the common plates that we would use and everything and the special dishes, it's even more significant when you take the special items that Nebuchadnezzar had and that he took out of the temple at Jerusalem, and now you're just using them like Dixie cups. When you get through with the Dixie cup, what do you do with it? You're done with it. Well, that's what we're seeing here on the part of Belshazzar. All right, Ben? Yeah, and and that's what I said, in a sense that doesn't even compare, but we understand the good china, the good dishes versus the everyday stuff, but in a much more elevated category. So let's look at this. Daniel chapter 6. We got a few moments. So it seemed good to Darius. Now remember, Darius gets the kingdom at the end of chapter 5. And it seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom. Now, before we go any further, how old is Daniel going to be at this time? Now, Darius is 62. But how old's Daniel? If Daniel was 15, giving him that age, 15, when he was taken out of Jerusalem in 606, and now we come to Darius and he's 500 and something, then we're 522, we're looking at somewhere around 80 plus years of age for Daniel. And so the Babylonians. So now we have him as the Medes are here, and it seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom. So when you go to Ezra 1 in chapter 1, or Esther 1:1. There are going to be 127 provinces and stuff that are going to be considered. And so we have this huge area of land. And so there were 120 satraps, and over them 3 commissioners. So you had 120 people. A satrapy, as you look at that word, it was a person that was placed in charge of a dedicated area. And so you have that taking place. Then over these 120 individuals, there was 3, and one of them was Daniel. Now, we're not talking about something the Babylonians did. This is what the Medes are doing. Darius the Mede. Now, how he knew, why he kept Daniel in this place, we don't know. Did he know of the things that Daniel had done? Well, yeah, I mean, possibly, I don't know. But Daniel is one of these 3 commissioners, and these satraps were accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now notice, you have 120 satraps, and so then you have 3 commissioners, so we would think, dividing that up, that it was probably 40 apiece. So Daniel was over 40 distinct areas so that the king would not be suffering loss. So, loss in what?
Everything.
Okay? Everything. Money, taxation, agricultural stuff, what they were supplying to the king, whether it be, wheat, barley, corn, these things. Daniel was in charge, we would assume, of 40 areas, and he was the commissioner over that, and so he was there to make sure that the king, Darius, did not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and the satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. So once again, much like Joseph, we read about in the book of Genesis, what has Daniel done? Risen to the top. The king's observing his ability, and he says, okay, now I'm going to put you over everything. And so you remember when Joseph was in his position, he was second in the kingdom of Egypt. Only one person was above him, and that was Pharaoh. And that's what's fixing to happen here to Daniel. He's going to be second in command. So there's apparently going to be a change in the structure that's going to take place here. So you're going to have the king, and then you would have 3 commissioners, then you would have the satraps. Well, now there's going to be King Darius, and there's going to be whom? Daniel, and he's then going to be in charge of all of this. Yes, Eric? Oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, we have to see the hand of God in this. It's not a deal where Daniel's doing this all just on his own ability and own accomplishments. But what we'll see is, and we didn't get to it, but Daniel, this is something we continue to see throughout the book of Daniel, is in every place Daniel found himself, who was he going to honor? Always. And so even as we continue to look through this in this 6th chapter, we'll note that. Okay, everyone, thank you.